Yes, exactly. I love it. I love it. Yes.
All right, I am now going to let everybody in.
Yay. Chaka.
She's got a bracelet on too.
And I am disabling the waiting room.
Hey, everybody. Look what we're wearing. TagCon, TagCon. Yay. All right, it's TagCon 2023. Good to see everyone. Good to see everyone. Who is excited?
Okay, just a reminder that folks you are to turn your video off and be on mute.
Yeah, because we don't want to have interference from another planet coming in, you know. Sounds from Atlantis.
Good morning.
Come on in. It's going to be a great day.
How is everyone this morning?
All right, this is our panel, Meet the Author. And I have with me our very wonderful creator and author, Vera Nazarian. So, hello, Vera.
Hey, everybody. Hey, awesome. You know, everybody, I want to, first of all, before we even begin, thank you to the awesome volunteers who are running this. That includes Nancy, of course, and Terry and Carrie and Liz and Mary and Susan, and just I can end this, and Ellen. You know, there's so many of you guys, and I just want to make sure that you guys know that this would not be possible without all of these wonderful ladies. Okay, so let's go.
All right. Vera, for the new fans out there, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Your experiences as a refugee from Russia, your love of art, history, and music. We'll start with those two.
Sounds like a good start. I came to the United States as a little girl, and you may actually have seen a little bit of this in the presentation that I was released yesterday during the pre-recorded panels. It's called A Gift from Earth. And I told you a little story about my refugee status and what happened to me back in 1976. But that's the year when we left the USSR. My family were refugees, and we immigrated to Lebanon. And when we arrived to Lebanon, I did not know really any English. I started to learn English back in Moscow, that's where we live. In Moscow, USSR, I in third, or is it either second or third grade, we started, I think second grade, I started to do rudimentary English. And the extent of my English was like, you know, very basic sentences. And then when we were refugees in Lebanon, because Lebanon it's a French colony, and they had a bunch of people there that were speaking French, and they had street signs in English, French, Arabic, some other language I can't think of. But so it was very much international. So I started to pick up English, and I believe I even wrote my first little poem in Lebanon as a little kid about a cat.
Well, you do have a love for animals.
Yes, I love animals. So in any case, after we got to Lebanon, the civil war there started. So we were like under siege and all kinds of horrible things. But we got out of there, and we were refugees to Greece. So we came to Sunion, which was the place where 10 miles away in a little hotel where they were holding all us refugees, there was the temple of Poseidon. So that's something that will come and play later on as we talk about the Greece, you know, the attack on Greece. But anyway, so from Greece, I got to America. I turned 10 a month after I got there, and I was already picking up English pretty actively because I just love to read. And I read in Russian because that was my native language, right? So I was reading in Russian, but my abilities to read were less than my desire to read. So I was just forcing myself. And I think that's the best way to learn a language. You force yourself because you're so interested. You pick up a book in another language and you just start to go. No matter what, you're gonna, half the words will make no sense. So I studied really hard. I picked it up. I read as much as I could in English, and then I started to write. And when I was around, I mean, at that point, I was really scribbling away. I think I scribbled a really silly kids-like kind of story all through, starting from 5th grade, and then in junior high school, I was writing this novel that made no sense, fantasy epic. And then finally, I published my first short story to a real anthology from Daw Books. It was called Sword and Sorceress 2. And that was when I was a high school senior, and then in college and so on. And I just kept going and going. And my first book was out in 2001. That was Dreams of the Compass Rose. And then from there on, I was, this was back in the days of traditional publishing. So I was submitting short stories. So all of my stuff that was published then was traditional. It was like in anthologies and other publishers. And then came the indie revolution around 2000, and I would say 2010 or so is when I started to do self-publishing, which before that was really much a stigma. Nobody would do, if you were self-published, people didn't want to take you seriously. So
Well, yeah, they just didn't think you were any good if you saw.
yeah, it was just like, who the heck are you? Why would nobody want to take your book in the real publishers if you're any good? But the point of the matter is it's not accurate. It's not how the world really works. So if you look back in the history, Dickens, Jane Austen, a lot of these people, like Dickens was self-published. He published.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he was. He published other people too. I believe he published Elizabeth Gaskell or something. I can't recall that, but yeah. So anyway, self-publishing. I wrote a different series. It didn't really take off. And then finally in 2013, The Atlantis Grail. I said, why don't I try something that's more contemporary? Because before that, I was writing really like old, epic, historical, all this stuff that's really kind of old-fashioned fantasy. And I said, you know what? Let's bring it into the modern era. So The Atlantis Grail is a near future series, as you're aware. It starts out in the year 2047, and then it goes. I think the duration of that first, the major 4-book series arc is 40. It's around 48. It's like a two year or so approximately.
Well, they spend a year in space.
Right, exactly. So that's the big,
And we get so maybe a year and a half, but it's still
something like that. So around 1 to 2 years. But so anyway, the storyline is contemporary, and I wanted to write everything that I was excited about in that type of fiction. In other words, adventure mixed with science, mixed with wonder, sense of wonder. And that's how it kind of came alive. And I wanted to have a non-traditional, smart main character as opposed to like this kick-ass, because there's so many. It became such a popular thing to have female characters who go around and become instant like warrior goddesses, and they just smite everyone. And I figured, why don't we start with a girl who's just a nerd? She's a nerdy kind of klutzy, nerdy, but she is very confident about her intellectual ability. So that's the only thing she's confident about, not interpersonal skills, not but she knew when she had opinions, she was confident about her opinions. And that's
I think Asen described her as skinny with bony elbows and a big mouth.
Big mouth, yes, because if she decided something was according to her belief structure or her thoughts or her whatever, she would be pursuing that for a long time, like a relentless little puppy. So, that's Gwen Lark, persistently intellectual. But
Now, Vera,
that's
you
really
also have
important.
you also have a love of history, art, and music. You want to share some insight into that?
Sure. I love I've always loved music. I like to sing. I'm pretty good at it, but I have, a lot of us are pretty good at that. So, but I wanted to incorporate the sounds and music into my story because I always was fascinated with ancient history. I love ancient Greece. I was obsessed as a kid with ancient Greece. I wanted to be called Athena. I told my mom when I was a little kid in Russia, in Moscow, I was like, my name is no longer Vera, it is Athena. And I made my own bows and arrows out of wooden sticks in the backyard. And I ran around the backyard in our like kind of like a big project type, apartment. Imagine those Moscow apartment buildings with many stories. And down in the yard, it would be kids playing. And so I would have my little bows and arrows. And I would shoot them. And
Well, I mean, I had as a small child, I had the full cowgirl outfit, including the guns and holsters, and the holsters had the
you have guns.
embroidery on them and
little arrows, and they were, and I made spears because like Amazon warriors, spears. So I was like the Greek version of this thing. So that was my really earliest obsession. Then of course I loved ancient Egypt with all the layers of mystery that it has. Because think about it, Egypt is one of the longest running ancient civilizations that we know of, and it has such a rich layered history. And to me, Atlantis came as a natural outgrowth of something called the ancient astronaut theory. Now, you may have heard about it. This is like the show Ancient Aliens, and I'm a huge fan of this. And let me tell you something. Back in the USSR, when Chariots of the Gods first came out, the book and the movie, the movie was made. It's a book written by and I cannot remember the guy's name. He's a German who wrote this idea that what if there were ancient aliens back in the ancient days, and it changes the whole history. So all of the USSR was obsessed. My parents, as a little kid, that was to me like a normal thing to think, yeah, sure, there were ancient. So when I come in here to America and people are like, oh, that's just wacky stuff. And I said, well, really, why is it wacky? We can't really prove or disprove. Well, maybe we can. So ancient astronaut theory is really embedded in my mind. And a lot of this, like the way ancient Atlantis kind of started up, and the idea of this ancient great technological civilization, maybe even more than one, multiple ones in the ancient dark past, nothing is proved. We can't really disprove or prove. We can say, well, we haven't found any remnants of those civilizations, but you know what? Sometimes we haven't really looked close enough. What's under the ocean? What's out there? We have not dug deep enough in the sands of the Sahara and the sands of, around Egypt, and who knows? So I like to remain open-minded about all of these things. And because of that, it's fun to write stories, right? To write stories.
Vera, Larkus Ending was talking about Chariot of the Gods. He said he thinks you mean Doniken.
Yes, it's Eric or something von Doniken.
I think so.
Yeah, so that's the guy. I had a brain burn. That's the guy who wrote the book Chariots of the Gods, and then the movie was made, and the movie it was like a super bestseller in the USSR, and you have no idea how big. I mean, here it's like, nobody, I think people are like, oh yeah, whatever. Back in the USSR, people were like, it was huge. So, and it became like a part of, normal. Everybody's like, yeah, that's what it was.
All right. Now I have a question for you. Do the characters speak to you?
They speak to themselves. In other words, I do not find myself as anyone in the story. What I do is I see the story unrolling. It's like kind of like watching a movie in my head. And I see, Gwen walking around, maybe a little bit like when I'm writing her point of view, I'm like in the video game, the POV first person shooter thing where you're walking around, a little bit like that. So yes, in that sense, but I am not her. I'm just channeling her. You know, that's I'm kind of hovering around her body and watching all the other characters. So for that reason, in the series, you don't get you cannot see scenes. There's no third person other narrator. So whatever you see is whatever Gwen sees, hears, gets told by other characters. That's why we never saw the huge, immense battle in Survive. All the battles that were happening in space around all the different space stations in Survive, we couldn't see them because Gwen was not there. So we were hearing about them later. We were hearing about them on the comms, on the interstellar comms equipment as much as we could. And I really wish there was a way around that. But, you know, once they make a film, a movie or a TV series about this, hopefully the problem will not be there because you can visually.
Well, that's, you know, when you are, because otherwise you would have to go, would have to switch points of view.
Right,
And
right.
if not done, well, I guess is the right word there.
Yeah.
It can get very confusing. I mean, I do know, I do recall other books where you start out with one person and then it flips back and forth. You go, okay, oh, wait a minute. Whose point of view am I reading now? Yeah, that's.
That kind of switching can be done well or not. And for example, I come from a tradition of writing third person, epic, multiple switcheroo like that. Think of Game of Thrones. People think of that a lot. A little bit of Tolkien, but Tolkien is more like omniscient. So he's kind of like more, he doesn't really even switch POV. He just does like an omniscient overview of all the characters. But anyway, that kind of view is more of an old style. Right now, all the contemporary fiction, especially the young adult, as you know, this series is theoretically young adult categorized, but it kind of grows up. So she grows up. But those series are written first person. A lot of times, most of it, you think of the Hunger Games. It's all first person. It's all written from I am going, I am seeing, and it's present tense. So the tense has also changed. Used to be everything was past tense, third person. And now everybody expects books to be first person, present tense, meaning I am walking. Instead of she walked to the store, it is I am walking to the store. It makes it more real, more in the moment. And I think people expect that.
I think the only differences were in Ace in Blue and Ace in Black because of where he was in the present and he was remembering. But even as he remembered, when he was in that moment of that memory, it became
Right. There were
present.
certain time blurring things, and I actually kind of show it because his tense kind of fluctuates in some of the parts, but when you actually land in that time back in the memory, it becomes first person present. So it's always when the action is happening is first person present, whether it's Gwen's point of view or Aeson's in the two novellas. And when we start having more novellas, because we don't forget, we're getting Zelio's novella is next. Celio or Zelio? Remember, you can pronounce it both ways. So Celio or Zelio, his novella is coming up next. Then from there on, we're probably going to have, I think I'm aiming to have Bree Walton's novella after him. Then the rest, there's going to be Logan, there's going to be, you know, we'll have George, we'll have LaRonda, you know, we'll go through all the characters, but we're going one at a time, and it's going to be first person present tense for pretty much all of them. There may be slight variations, but you know, that's what we're aiming for.
That is the aim.
Yeah.
I do know, now I'm going to ask this question. Do you, in the beginning, when you're starting the story, I mean, I know how you kind of, you know where your destination is, but you don't know how you're going to get there.
Yeah.
I do remember way back when that you told me that you knew the last sentence of Survive, but
Yep, I did.
I mean, you know, I never knew what it was. And
Well-
you never hinted at what it was until we actually read it on the page.
And it was actually the last sentence of the main chapter, not the
Mhm.
epilogue.
Not
because
the epilogue.
like an extra thing, like almost like a later thing. But the last sentence was Earth wants its artifacts back. And that's the thing that the museum war, the museums were fighting over the artifact in the end. And I've always wanted to end that with Earth wants an artifact back from a,
And they didn't get them all either.
yes, they're not, and that story is not over. You will have more about that in the Book of Everything and Starlight, which is so Starlight is the prequel series of the last book of the prequel series, and it's actually the last book of the whole series. And the Book of Everything is right before that. It's the 5th book of the original series. So you will get more of the museum stuff, and you will get other fun, contemporary Gwen and Aesop period stuff. So
Vera, is it difficult writing a prequel to a series?
it becomes more complicated. I think it's not so much difficult as in you have to be careful. And I'm already kind of a slow writer. You know that. I write slow, but kind of covering everything. In other words, I am not like a sketcher, but I'm like an final layer paint. I'm going through in each of my chapters, when it's done, it's near the final. So I slowly and carefully go, and I have to go back. I have to research my own books and remember, okay, so and so did this and that. What did the ancients do? What was the name of that person and that, whatever. So that's part of the reason why I wrote this book, which, let me see if you guys, there we go. You can see People of the Atlantis Grail, which is, it's basically all the characters in the original series with a few mentions of the ancients in the prequel, but it's everybody here with all their explanations, all their descriptions, things like, you get charts, you got, let's see, can you see it? Nope.
Nope.
So there we go. Character charts, like the name and like all their families and the relationships, their lives and so on. So for all the major characters, and this helps me write. So I literally wrote this not just for you guys, but for me, because I need to be able to have it very organized and very much as I'm writing the prequel series. Everything is like here's a fun kind of an analogy for you guys. You'll have heard of the Russian nesting dolls, Matryoshka. Matryoshka is the name of the nesting doll. Well, think of it this way. You know how you start to nest dolls and you open up, there's another one, they're small, and they get smaller and smaller. Well, you know what? It's backwards. The original series, Qualify, Compete, Win, Survive, are the littlest nesting doll. And you know what the prequel series is? It's the outer nesting dolls. You go outward, which means you go back in the greatness of time, back and forth. So you're expanding around it. The universe grows because the universe of the Atlantis is going outward, meaning it's going back deep time, going back in the ancient days, trying to literally explain the origin of humanity. So we're going so far back, and it's going to touch all kinds of interesting things that are part of our common civilization history and myth and other kind of traditions. So you will be getting some interesting things. I wish I could tell you because it's such fun spoilers right now. I'm like,
for example, we know that Semi earns a place on the Vimana.
Yes.
And that she becomes a famous author. But what we don't know, and you will tell us in the book, is how she accomplishes this, because right now she is illiterate.
Those of you who are following along, because I am posting chapters of Eos. They're currently originally they were being posted on Wattpad, and then I found that Wattpad was no longer really a good place to do it. It has become kind of like a very Wild West type of environment. So I said, too many people like taking screenshots and doing things. So and
the AI bots.
Right, that bots. Oh Lord, you guys know all about it. But anyway, so I took all whatever I was posting there and I put it into Patreon, which is a more secure. It's a paywall. Yes, you have to pay, but it's like $3 a month. So it's pretty much, less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And anyway, the point is I put the chapters there, and you're getting the story of Semi, who is that little scribe who you got in Survive, and the little person who was like writing all these little entries next to Arlenari, which is the princess, the ancient princess. Well, this prequel series is about those people. And the main character of the first book, Eos, is Semi, because this is a spoiler if you have not read the chapters that I posted so far, but it's a little spoiler. It's not a big deal, but it's a fun spoiler. Okay, are you guys ready? Semi, her full name is Semirameos. Semirameos. So she's the same person who wrote the Semiram cycle, the book that was mentioned in Survive. Semiram cycle was this ancient poem, like a Homeric, almost like an ancient Homer of Atlantis. So that's her, Semiram. That's the name she used for that. And Semirameos is her full name, and Eos is like a nickname that she gets at some point in the books. So Eos is the title of the books. That's
Oh, and it's also morning. It also means
yes,
morning.
it's also
So
dawn, and it's dawn and morning, and it's Semirameos. That's her name. So the title of the book is Semi's nickname, and I have a kitty here. Uh-oh. Kitty wants to drop by for a photo bomb. That's Kitty. Look at that. Look at that. Okay, bye-bye. So that was a little spoiler for you guys. That Semirameos is the main character, and she has another spoiler coming on. That's okay. Fun spoiler. She has the storyteller voice. Back in the ancient days of Atlantis, the original Atlantis on Earth, people did not talk about voices yet. That was not developed as well as it has been by the time that the modern Atlanteans. So 10,000 Atlantean years ago, or 12,500 Earth years ago, back in those days, people started to discover the power of voices. So Semi has a storyteller voice, and she starts to develop it. But at first, of course, she's an illiterate little poor girl in the slums. She's a resident of the most slum-like area in the circles of Atlantis, because ancient Atlantis is a city of circles. Again,
and if you want to compare where she lives to modern Atlantis, it would sort of be like Kokei.
I'm sorry, like what?
Like Kokei.
Oh yeah, Kokai. Okay, Kokai.
Kokei.
Yeah, that's the Kokai is the, as you know, in the original series, he is the winner of the games. He's the kind of like acrobatic, kind of like a almost like a drag queen, like, he's just he's an entertainer. So he dresses exotic and he does this stuff. And he lives in the slums of Sky Tangle City. And it's a nickname for Themyscira, which is one of the regions in the contemporary Atlantean Poseidon. Oops. I just had a cat ball again. I don't know if you heard me. I'm like, woo!
Well, I've got a dog here next to
Yes,
me.
yes. Cats enjoying their little time. So Themyscira is the name of that region where they had the parade. Remember, he won the games and he held the parade. So Kokai is the person, and he lives in a very similar situation, but actually not as bad as the ancient girl.
Right.
Semi's situation in her circle, in the 10th circle, which is called Denwen's Pit. Denwen is a god, an ancient god, and Pit. They live in the pit.
I mean, and then Anu came from very poor surroundings as well.
It's different. Yes, he's more of like this wilderness. He's more like a literally a wilderness. But she's more like from the city. She's from Poseidon. But Poseidon has like a really bad area outside the most poverty-ridden area, the outer circles. So she's in the outermost circle of Poseidon, and she chops mushrooms. We all know that. That's her first job. And then from there on, a lot of interesting things start happening. So without giving it away.
Something I found was interesting so far that you've not, said anything about, is that only 2 ancient bloodlines still exist in modern times. You've got the Cassiope and we've got the Heru.
Yeah.
Is it too much of a spoiler to ask if there's any more?
You know what? I cannot tell you anything. I literally cannot, because
Okay.
it is a spoiler. But yes, for a fact, we have two big ancient family lines. Of course, the Cassiopeia, they're forever, and they're like from the earliest ages before even the thing is, even in ancient Atlantis, Cassiopeia were already ancient. So they are
Okay.
ancient. They are scary. I mean, scary ancient. Like, how did they even manage to keep this? So anyway, but Hero is another. They're kind of an offshoot. So Hero is. They're not the same bloodline, but they're also very old. Just like they're going back in the ancient days. One of the original, humans. Not species, because that's not the right term. They're like hybrids or whatever. So anyway, Hero, they are in my ancient Atlantis, they're a region. Hero, they have Deshret, because remember we have new Deshret on
Mhm.
Colony Planet, but back in the old days, Deshret there was the old Deshret. So there is Deshret, that's a part of the continent of Atlantis, because Atlantis is a continent that takes up according to my mythology, which I'm following Plato's, where his Atlantis is beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, that's my Atlantis, and that's how, I don't care where anybody. It's not in the Aegean Sea. It's not in the. It is in the Atlantic. That's why it's Atlantis. So it's a huge continent that sunk and took up Bahamas, Bermuda, that whole island, the Devil's Triangle. The good old, the scary triangle. So all of that is Atlantis, and we know why the triangle is scary. We have been told why in the original series, but anyway.
Yep. That is where the anomaly is
Yes, the
located.
rift. And guess what? You get to find out how the rift, what the heck that rift is. That's in Eos. You get to find out what is happening. Why? And you of course get to find out how Arlenari, which is the Cassiopeia princess, how did she and Semi meet? Like what's happening? How do they like interact? So that's coming up, and it's going to be so much fun. And I really wish I can give you spoilers, but all I can say is if you want to read along, I'm up to chapter 13, I believe. Chapter 13 on Patreon. So you can watch. And people on Patreon will be getting it. I've decided to go all the way. You will get the chapters as soon as I'm done, and I'm posting them. And here's my big hope. I want to be done with Eos before the end of the year. And you know how I am.
Yes, I know.
I am trying really hard. I am aiming for like Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all that period, the December, just the general winter holiday period. So I am aiming for that period to be done with Eos. Now, I may actually be done sooner. I don't know, because it just depends. I know what is happening, but it's been so busy, and tack on, dealing with, so I have not been able, my first part of the year is always taken up with other things. I have to deal with, a lot of taxes and other things around that. And now.
And then we've got TagCon Greece coming up in
Right,
September.
but that's not a big deal. That's no longer a problem. I am done. In other words, I am done with all the other secondary stuff. So now it's full steam ahead, which means that starting from after TagCon is done, I can kick myself into gear and get back to Eos because I want to. It's how I make our living, guys. So, I can't, this is not just me having a luxury of, I'm just writing one chapter. It's like, no, I need to get this done as soon as I can, because that's my job.
Well, you need to be able to buy your plane ticket to Greece.
Right. And I'm so excited that my job happens to be something that I love to do. And that's, as a full-time writer, writing these books, I am so thrilled to be doing it. And the thing is, remember the nested dolls. It's only going to get wilder because you're going to put more. You have a little doll and you realize she's inside a bigger doll who is inside a bigger doll. So it's getting bigger and more greater world. The universe of the Atlantis Girl is expanding outward. Like our own universe is expanding. So is the tag universe. Woo! And that's what's happening out there.
Well, I mean, it does make for, an interesting time. We live in an interesting time.
Yep. And it's good to escape from that interesting time, because the times they say that's an ancient Chinese curse. I don't know how accurate that is, but people say that term, that may you live in interesting times, and is an ancient Chinese curse, because living in those times is not as much fun as reading about this.
Well, yeah, and the fact that it's near future,
Yes.
you know, for example, right now, Asen is actually cooking. Well, I mean, you know, Devorah is pregnant with him right
Yeah,
now.
if we go by the timeline, Asen is already conceived, so he's already
He's
you know,
cooking.
an embryo. If we look at the real life, it's the year 2023, and Asen has, you know.
Asen
And
will be born in
you can
September.
look in this book and you can find out everybody's birthday. So that Asen's birthday converted to Earth birthday and Atlantean birthday. So if you're curious, it's all in this little book here. This is great. And yeah. I was gonna say,
Another thing
the
is,
zodiac signs are coming up. Zodiac signs of Atlantis, because
mhm.
and the reason I need to explain this, Atlantean astrology is not the same. They don't predict the future. They use it as a psychological basis of explaining personality. So it's a completely different attitude. They don't think stars cause you to do something. No, they just think that you who were born at a certain point in time are like a fixed dot, and you have your own characteristics. So anyway, it's fun. There's 16 signs coming up. There's going to be its own book, but I will be posting some of this on the Patreon too. So the 16 astrological signs are, in fact, already listed. I can't find the page, but they're in there just as a starter. But the in-depth descriptions of what each sign means, who the characters are, you can find out their signs, but what does it mean? That's its own separate book. So that's coming later.
And we've talked about all sorts of things coming, you know, down the pike later. As far as you know, the Superfan series, once Dawn of the Atlantis Grail, there'll be another companion, there'll be another Dramatis Personae.
Right, Dramatis Personae, however you pronounce it, but yeah, this is a Dramatis Personae for the original series, and of course, once you have the prequel series, there will be just as many people, because there's a lot of stuff happening in the 5 books. Believe me, you're gonna need another book just like this. So, you know,
Or maybe more.
that's coming. A lot.
Speaking of people, and actually the companion, I will publicly thank you for the dedication.
You are very welcome, Nancy. And I want to mention that Nancy has helped compile the list of names for me, because it's a monument. I have my own, but she put a lot of it in order, and then I can expand on that. So thank you, Nancy. You did a humongous job. Without that, it would have taken me so much longer to do it just myself, to pick and choose. And you know, I'm one of those writers I mentioned, I'm a pantser. I don't do the outline, and I can't. I have very funny little notes here and there, very disorganized, and that's how my brain works. It's like a mess in here. So, and I'm so glad that there are other people, my beta readers, you know, Nancy and other people who can help me focus this mess that's in my head.
Yeah, when it comes to the math, you know,
Yes.
we kind of help. Liz and I kind of take care of that for you.
Yes, Liz is another person who is great at the numbers, and because me converting numbers and all that stuff, like the wonderful Atlantean converter, that's Liz's, you know, nephew. Thank God for people who know how to do these things. I cannot. Anyway, so all that stuff, all these good materials that help us get more out of the Atlantis Grail. This is the Superfan series. So far we have 2 items. People, the original book was the companion, and now we have People of the Atlantis Grail. So we have 2 books in that series to help us organize.
Just some comments that were made in chat while we were chatting.
Yeah.
When you talked about, you know, wanting to be Athena, then Mary said, so that's how Gwen got her middle name.
Yes, that's exactly right. Little Athena, right? And of course,
then
yeah.
And then on the forum, as we were, progressing up in the ranks and so forth, and I think when I became an Astra Diamond, I had to come up with my call sign. And everybody voted on my call sign and selected my call sign as Athena.
There we go. And this is, by the way, the forum, the Atlantis Bell Forum has a kind of like a member ranking system. So when you go in, as you start making more posts, and there, it's not as active maybe as Facebook, but it has some great material. You will notice people's next to their names, they're different ranks. So first you become like, you qualify, then you become a candidate, then you're like so you go through all these, you're a pilot, you become Astra Daimon, and so on and so forth. It's so much fun. So people, if you want to get on the forum and post, you will go through qualification, because it's set up that way. It's set up to qualify you all the way until you
And
become,
in the very beginning, it was so much fun because we didn't know what we didn't know what the next tier was. And so it was in some ways it was a competition. Okay, who's got more? Oh, Nancy's up there. Okay, one more post, Nancy. We'll find out what it's gonna be.
the membership tiers are what, I set them up secretly without telling everyone, and then somebody would reach it first, and you would have, oh no, they're Imperial Cassiopeia now. What happened? They reached the level. So you rank up. It's like a game.
Ellen just said that Athena was always her jam. She had a pet turtle named Athena as a child.
Oh yeah, I love Athena. She was my favorite goddess, and now I've decided that Athena is one of my goddess, and also Hecate is the other one. I think I've reached the range from Athena to Hecate. So yes, I my favorite goddesses of Greece. That's what it is, and of course I had to put that in in the story.
Does anybody out there have any questions for Vera that they'd like to put into the chat?
See if there's anything in the chat.
Nope.
That turtle. Somebody has a pen. Yes, there you go, Ellen. Yes. So
Ellen wants to know how we can best support you as an author.
well, first of all, I am so grateful for all of you, just basically reading the books and telling others about it, because the best thing you can do for me is spread the word, because that's what happens to all the, people whose books are more successful. It's because of a lot of times it's people in the family telling their friends. Of course, buying books helps, but it's spreading the word. That's even more important. So if you're excited about the Atlantis Grail, tell them that more is coming. The world, it's so much not done. The core 4-book series is done, yes, but as I said, that's the little nesting doll. That one is done. The outer nesting doll is coming. It is huge. There's so much fun. There is a parallel in the 4 books, in the first 4 books of the core series with the first 4 books of the prequel series, in terms of there's Qualify, and there's a big parallel to Qualify in the Eos book, because the ancients are qualifying for rescue from the original asteroid apocalypse. And it's a completely different type of qualification. It's a service it's a competition to be taken on to these ships to be serving the Cassiopeia and the nobility. So all these poor people everywhere, all across the city and the continent, they're trying to make it so that they're chosen to serve on those ships. And serve has different meanings. There's all kinds of jobs. There's warriors. Again, think of the categories in the games. There are the warriors, the scientists, the technology, the domestic servants. This is different here, because we have domestic servant category. We have messengers, things that are, what would a servant be required to do on an ark ship to help their master or their employer, the fancier nobles. So all these people are going through at the same time as the rest of people on ancient Atlantis are just preparing to die.
Well, we know that some are slaves,
Yes, there's some slaves, and mostly
indentured servants,
like
and then
indentured servants, slaves, and basically a lot of the free people, even the poor free people, like Sammy, she's not a slave, she's not an indentured servant, but she is poor, and she gets a pittance, she gets a few, for really horrible manual labor. So there's a whole section of the people who live in Poseidon, because they're the lucky ones. So the people who are more like slaves and indentured are from the outer provinces and also outside Atlantis, around the Stone Age Earth, because Earth is in the Stone Age right now. This is like, we have cave people out there at the same time as there's this highly advanced civilization in the middle of Atlantic Ocean. So there's all these interesting things, and you're going to discover that some of the ancient legends of like that period will be explained in the series. So you get ready, and I cannot give you spoilers because it's so much fun, but it's ancient things explained, their origins explained. So a lot of it is like,
okay, Marcus Sending wants to know if there's any chance of a German translation of the books.
that's a great question. Now, translations are really expensive, and I'm working on it. That's something that I would love to have, but because I am a self-published author here, in this case, I am going to be covering this myself. In other words, it's a out-of-pocket expense, so I will need to get that going somehow, and I would love to have it, but I cannot give you a firm date yet because it just depends on how I can get this happen. So it's going to happen. I will have a German translation. I will also try to have some other translations, but if there is a translation to be done first, that's going to be the German one. And I'm really, that's in my to-do list. So thank you for asking. That's a great question.
Harriet wants to know if ASIN, she said, does ASIN get rid of the secret science facility now that he is the Imperator?
Okay, great. Another great question. This is that facility is going to be transformed. So it's not, you're not going to get rid of it because there's scientists and things, but you're going to, the nature of its research will be no longer so black ops site, like, because it used to be like a black ops site, and nobody, like, they didn't even know what they were in. The people working in that facility didn't realize they were working inside an ancient Vimana.
Right, they did.
That's what that is.
I think the ST, what is it? Is it Bennu? Robot Bennu was the
Right.
STA.
Yeah, Ben
He's
was
going,
the
what?
director.
You mean I was in a ship and I didn't know it?
Right, because it's treated as just some underground facility in the Grail Stadium, but you know what the Grail is? It's the top section of the ship where the ball used to be. The ball that was the chamber, so that got cut off in half. The top half became the disc of the raw disc in New Deshret and so on. But anyway, so this great ancient ship, you're going to hear more about this in the Book of Everything and Starlight. So a lot of this will be explored further, because that's when we continue the story. It's no longer the core story, but it's still the continuation of Gwen and Aeson and the gang and all those people. So those characters in those books. Let me see. I was going to say one other thing, and I kind of came out of my mind. I have to remember what I want to say. Something that is going to be really, really fun. It's an EOS, and I ask me another question, and I'll see if I can remember this.
Okay, well, Larka Sending says thank you.
You're welcome.
That was for, the German translation.
Right.
Because
Oh, yeah.
That's great news.
Yeah.
And then Lisa is commenting about, she says, and the games, which will be the parallel. Is there going to be are there going to be more intellectual games?
If you talk about like the ancient qualification, okay, here's the thing, it's different. It's not the same thing. It's still qualifying for, they have to be useful. So yes, there will be intellectual things, and because they are looking for pilots, so they're actually going to be looking for people who can pilot, and they would need people who can do the technology with voice, because voice activated technology is already there. So they were going to be looking for pilots. They're going to be looking for people who can get things done, like people who can do domestic stuff, obviously, servant, entertainers, even though it's like, yeah, people need to be able to be occupied instead of going mad, so they need entertainers. They're gonna need, obviously, people who can run the ships, all the techs who do the different the systems. The scientists are vitally important, but so that's part, the intellectual stuff is a part of that. So the competitions are not the games. And here's one thing I want to mention, that you all know that in qualification, we always say, what came first? Did the games of the Atlantis Grail or one influenced the other? But in reality, qualification came first. This is what the original qualification is what I'm writing now in else. Then once they get to the colony planet Atlantis, they start getting sick and dying off, and the teenagers need to be brought out. That's when they get the games going. So the games, the qualification tests become games. And so the chicken or the egg, we know that the original was the qualification. So that's first.
Did you remember what you were trying to think of?
I can't remember. I think maybe that was part of it. Maybe I was trying to say that this, yeah.
Oh, Harriet wants to know, this is an interesting one. Do Atlanteans attend the birth of their children, and will Aeson be allowed in the delivery room when Gwen delivers her children?
You will, I can't tell you guys, because this will be explored in the Book of Everything. So that's, see, anything to do, when you start asking me things about Gwen and Aeson, their whatever, that's the Book of Everything. And of course, if we go back into the little kind of a very much separate type of storyline in the Amraved Days, which is that honeymoon book that I'm writing on Patreon, it's the adult 18 plus, the NSF. It's not.
That we're going to talk about more in depth this evening for us.
Right, we're going to be talking about, this is coming up later, the late night panel with the spicy stuff. That's the stuff that's happening on the honeymoon. Now, I don't want to talk about it in the general panels, but some of these things will be mentioned throughout the serialization of that book. Some of that type of material will be brought up, so you will get some.
I think at one point in, I don't know if this would be considered a spoiler, you kind of hinted at Amravit Days might be like a 4.5 as far as
it's not a part of the core series, because you don't have to read it. And it's like, if you're a
Right.
general reader, you don't want to read spicy stuff, and you shouldn't, so don't. But for anybody who is a grown-up and wants to read that, you can treat it as book 4.5. So it's the interim book between the book. So Amravit Days is sort of between the Book of Everything, between the End of Survive and the Book of Everything and the epilogue. The epilogue is later, so it's like,
yeah.
it's between the epilogue but it will have a few little fun nuggets and fun bits of information about people who show up in the Book of Everything. So there are some Easter eggs to be dropped, shall we say. So, yeah, but that's where it fits. It fits in that little space between the End of Survive and the Book of Everything.
Okay. Well, Vera, believe it or not, we've run out of time.
Thank you so much for all your great questions, everyone. Thank you. Enjoy the story and enjoy the rest.
And thank you, everybody. Our next session will be in just a few minutes, and we'll see you then. Thanks.
See you.